everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing another unhaul video. So this is my second unhaul, and the first one that I did towards the beginning of the year, I think, is actually one of my most popular videos, which I was very surprised by because I just didn't know that people liked unhauls that much. But I have more books that I am getting rid of, and since you guys seem to enjoy the first unhaul that I did, I thought I'd do another one for you. So I have, I think, over like 50 books that I am getting rid of. The majority of them are actually all from one series, which you'll see it's a massive series. And before I get into the books, I just also want to say that some of these books that I'm getting rid of are ones that other people really love, and if you love them, that's great. I'm happy that someone enjoys these books and you've gotten so much joy out of them, but they were not for me, or I just never planned to read them or never planned to reread them, so I don't really need them taking up space on my shelf. But I just wanted to put that out there, that it's not a comment on you or really the book so much as just that it wasn't the right book for me. So let's just get into the books themselves. Alright, so we'll start off right away with a book that many people love, which is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. So this is the first book in the Mortal Instruments series, which is a very popular series here on BookTube. I know lots of people love it. It's a series that a lot of people, like, that's what got them into reading. But urban fantasy isn't always my favorite, and this one just like didn't grab me. I have only read the first book, and I know that a lot of people say that like the books get better over time and that there are other like connected series that are maybe even better than the original series, but this just isn't one that I have the motivation to continue with. The next book that I have is another very popular one, which is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. And this one, I didn't dislike this book, I did enjoy it, but it just was, I just don't have the same like fervor of love for this one that many people do. I thought it was interesting and it had some, you know, very touching moments and things like that, but I have no plans to reread it, so I'm gonna let someone else read it and enjoy it. Then I have The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chenani. I'm probably mispronouncing that horribly, so I'm sorry about that. But this I read quite a few years ago. I read this actually right when the first book came out. I bought it at a bookstore in an airport because I was flying across the country and I needed something to read, so that's how I picked this one up. Going into this book, I didn't have super high expectations for it, but I felt like it didn't even meet those expectations. All I really wanted was something that was, you know, decent enough and entertaining for a flight. I felt like there were a lot of plot holes, there were a lot of parts that were confusing, but also the book I found very predictable. I didn't really like the writing that much. It just, like, it wasn't terrible, but it didn't really, you know, it didn't do it for me. Also, in case it wasn't clear, I'm not holding these up in any particular order. They're just in a bag next to my feet and I'm just pulling them out, so there's no particular order to how I'm listing these. But the next one that I have is Delirium by Lauren Oliver. So this is actually one that I DNF'd this year. I started listening to the audiobook in June. I got halfway through and realized that there was little to no plot. I was very bored and did not care, and it was very tropey. I did not enjoy this book at all, and I DNF'd the audiobook and then realized that I had the physical book on my shelf, and I was like, well, I'm never reading if I couldn't even get through the audiobook, I'm definitely not going to read the physical book, so I'm just going to get rid of it. Next up, I have A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. This is a kind of classic dystopian fiction, and that's why I read it last year, because I'm trying to slowly but surely, you know, work my way through a lot of classic dystopian fiction, and this one, I just didn't really like it. I didn't think it was that fun to read, but I also didn't think it was especially interesting or thought-provoking. I know that it's one that's kind of held up as this amazing dystopian fiction that is supposed to be very thought-provoking or very hard-hitting, and I just didn't think that it was, so I'm not gonna ever reread it. Then I have The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I'm probably saying that incorrectly as well, so sorry. But this is a very tiny little book, but very pretty. This I think is like the Barnes & Noble edition. I read this last year as well when I was on like a classics kick. I just wanted to read a whole bunch of classic books, and this is a really short, easy one to read. And I don't think I'm going to read it again, so thought I'd let it go. Then I have a novella, which is The Jewel and Her Lapidary by Fran Wilde. This I read last year as well, I think, and I thought that this had some interesting ideas. It is kind of hard to explain, but it has this magic system that has to do with different jewels and stones in the earth, and there is a lapidary who is someone who is able to kind of protect people from the influence of these stones, because the stones, I think, can like mess with your mind. I thought that the magic was interesting. I just didn't think that the writing of the book was very well executed, and I don't think that it should have been a novella. It would have been better as a full book so that they could explain things more and like flesh out this world, because I think it had an interesting premise and some interesting ideas. It just couldn't be executed well in such a short format. Then I have Dreams of Distant Shores by Patricia A. McKillip, and so this is actually the first book that I had read by Patricia McKillip, and I bought it mostly just because I love the cover. I just think the cover art is really beautiful, so I picked it up. And this is actually a collection of short stories by her, and they were okay. There were a couple that, you know, I had fun reading, but I wasn't a huge fan. I don't think I'm ever going to read it again. I'm not even sure how much more of Patricia McKillip's work I'm going to read. I've only read 2 of her books. I read this, and then I read The Forgotten Beasts of Eld, and I wasn't a big fan of that either, but she's kind of like classic fantasy, I feel like, so I might give her another try or 2, just in case the few books that I read by her weren't the right ones. Anyway, I digress. The point is, I'm going to be letting this book go as well. Then I have 2 books by the same author, which are Fairest by Gail Carson Levine and Ever, also by Gail Carson Levine. So these are fairy tale retellings. Gail Carson Levine wrote Ella Enchanted, and she also wrote The Two Princesses of Bamar. Ella Enchanted I read when I was younger, and I liked it. It wasn't like a favorite, but I loved The Two Princesses of Bamar so much, and I still have that on my shelf. I love that book. But I read these 2 books kind of hoping that I would love them as much as The Two Princesses of Bamar, and these ones just like didn't do it for me. I found them kind of bland compared to some of the other books that I've read by her, so I'm not going to be hanging on to them. Alright, so far we are at 10 books that I have unhauled. Next I have Redwall by Brian Jakes, and this one, I actually have another copy of this. So I was looking through my TBR shelf and realized that I had this extra copy of this book, so I'm going to be getting rid of it because I only need 1 copy. And this is a series that I loved so much when I was a kid, and I reread the first one recently, and it was okay, but I didn't have the same like love of it, which is, you know, reasonable. So I'm not sure if I'm even going to be keeping the other copy that I have, but for right now I'm only unhauling this one. Then I have a trilogy that I am unhauling, which is, I don't even know what this trilogy is called actually. Does it have a name? But the first one is Seraphim, the second is Gossamer, and the third one is Rihanna. And these ones are fantasy books. Obviously, I don't really remember that much about them, except that this one has angels, this one has fairies, and this one has dragons. And that's most of what I remember of it. And I liked them well enough when I read them. I read these a very long time ago, like at least over 10 years ago. And they were okay, but they were not my favorites. And by now, like, I'm not going to reread them. I definitely am not going to try, like, I don't remember them. I'm not going to reread them to try to remember them. There are some other series that it's worth it to me to reread to try and remember. This is not one of them. And then we have another series, which is the Maze Runner series by James Dashner. So that is the Kill Order, which I think is the prequel, then the original trilogy, which has the Maze Runner, the Scorch Trials, and then the Death Cure. And I think actually another book just recently came out, which is called like the Fever Code, but I have no intention of reading that. That's actually kind of how I decided to get rid of this series. I read this, I think pretty close to when the movie came out. It was like right before the first movie came out. And I read it again because it's a dystopian fiction, so I wanted to try it, but I was not a huge fan, especially because in some of the later books, it pretty much just turns into like zombies, and I'm not really a zombies person. And then I didn't really care about any of the characters except for that one character, Newt, I think his name was. I liked him, and that was it. That was the only reason I really kept reading these, was because I wanted to know what happened to Newt. But then I saw the Fever Code in the bookstore that there was like another book in the series that had just come out, and I had no interest in reading that, and I was like, well, if I'm not going to continue the series with a new book, I'm definitely not going to be going back and rereading the old books, so I may as well just get rid of these. So actually unhauling this series is kind of what inspired this whole unhaul, that I was like, oh, I have this whole series that I'm going to be getting rid of. Like, let's go see what else I can unhaul. Then I have Feast of Souls by C.S. Friedman. This is one that I read last year. I read it mostly because I love this cover. I kept looking at it in the bookstore and just thinking how pretty it was. I love the colors, and it has like these dragonfly wings, and I just really like the artwork on the cover. So I finally picked it up and read it. The premise is that it's the kind of magic that when you use magic, it actually uses up a piece of your soul and you die more quickly. So you use up pieces of your life until your lifespan is shortened and you die. And that sounded like a really interesting, like, dark twist to magic, but this book, like, it was kind of dark, I guess, but not as dark as I was expecting. And then I found a lot of the, like, plot twists very predictable in this one, so I don't think I'm going to be continuing with this series, even though I do love this artwork. And then I have Shape Changer's Song. Wow, I can't say that. Shape Changer's Song, Chronicles of the Kersuli? I don't know how to say it, but Omnibus 1. So I guess this had more than one book in it? I don't know. By Jennifer Robertson. I don't even remember this. I just found it on my shelf and I was like, I don't even recognize this book. But apparently I read it, and I read the description. I was like, well, I'm not going to be rereading this. And apparently it didn't make an impression the first time, so I don't think I need it. So we are now at 20 books that I'm unhauling, and now we are getting to the final series that I am getting rid of, which has like 30 books in it. It's a lot, so this is going to free up a lot of space on my shelves. And that series is the Xanth series by Piers Anthony. I actually never know if I'm saying his first name right, but this is a series that I read when I was in high school, and I haven't even finished the series. There are, I think, like 40 books in the series. I read the first 31 of these books. So this is a series that the entire world is based on puns. Like a breadfruit tree, the fruit is actually like loaves of bread growing on the tree. And there is a catapult, which is a giant cat that you sit on its tail, you feed it catnip, and then it catapults you across things with its tail. And probably there are lots of other much better puns than that, but those are the only ones that I can remember off the top of my head. I read this, you know, like 10 years ago, so it's been a long time. But I really loved it when I was younger. I thought they were so funny and so clever, and there was one summer where I pretty much read one book a day. But yes, I would pretty much just spend my summer reading one book a day for like a month or so. I have a very clear memory of one day when my parents were like cleaning out the garage or something, and they had all the doors in the house open, and they were out in the backyard like laying out everything to kind of decide what to get rid of, and I had put out a towel and I was just like lying on the ground reading one of these books and like listening to them like go through all of this stuff. I don't know why that's the memory that stuck with me, but I do have a very clear memory of these books. So this series is very nostalgic to me. I did try to reread the first book more recently in the last like year or two, and I didn't like it anymore. It's very silly, and that kind of humor just isn't my sense of humor anymore. I loved it when I read it the first time around, but I just don't find it as funny as I used to. But with this series, I am actually keeping the first book of the series just for nostalgia. I want to hang on to it. But I am getting rid of the other 30 books because I don't need all 31 of them for nostalgia. So I will just go through all of these books so that you can see what they are, and I hope that they're in the right order. I think I have them in the right order, but I'm not even sure. There are just so many that is really hard to keep track of. But the first book in the series is A Spell for a Chameleon, which is actually, this is the one that I am keeping on my shelf for the purpose of nostalgia. But after that, the books that I am unhauling from this series are The Source of Magic, Castle Rugna, Centaur Isle, Ogre, Nightmare, Dragon on a Pedestal, Cruel Lie. And you can see that even in these titles, some of the titles are spelled in certain ways that they are puns as well. They're very pun-filled books. So if you like puns, you might enjoy this series. Alright, so we're gonna continue with Gollum in the Gears, Tale of the Vole, Heaven Sent, Man from Mundania. Then we have Harpy Time, Demons Don't Dream, Color of Her Panties. I remember trying to explain this book to somebody once when I was reading it and being like, look, it's a weird title, okay, but it's not actually about that. Then we have Question Quest, Isle of View. Next we have Yon Ill Wind, Rock and a Hard Place, Rise of the Gargoyle. But wait, there's more. Then we have Fawn and Games, Zombie Lover, Zone of Contention, The Dastard, Swell Foop, Up in a Heavel, Tube Root, and Current Events, Pet Peeve, Dork Naked, and finally, Heir Apparent. And so those are the first 31 books of the series, and I think there is another 10 after that that I do not have because eventually I stopped reading the series after 31. I was just like, this is getting a little ridiculous and it's a little too much for me. So I think that is actually exactly 50 books that I am unhauling. So this will make a lot of space on my shelves, which is great. Although right now my shelves are looking a little sparse. I think I need to reorganize them to kind of fill in some of the gaps. But it'll be good to have a little more space and get these books out that I will not be rereading. All of these books that I am unhauling, I'm going to be donating to a local used bookstore. There is a bookstore near me that is the one I always donate my unhauled books to because it works with local libraries, and then the money that they make from reselling the used books goes back to supporting the local libraries. So I always like contributing to these bookstores whenever I can to support my local library. So that's mostly where I buy my used books, and that is also where I donate all of my unhauled books. So that is all for my second unhaul of the year. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on any of these books if you have read them. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!